Hi, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Joanna Nelson, and I'm a Finance Development Specialist with the New Mexico Economic Development Department. And we host a monthly webinar series that address financing topics and points of interest about financing within the state. So today we're really excited to address a really important topic about Brownfield. So thanks for joining us for the Brownfields 101. And we are joined today by Jennifer Muus with the New Mexico Environment Department, as well as Joel Salas, who is with the Economic Development Department's finance team, and Karen Peycke with the EPA. So these are all experts in the field that have been working in New Mexico and are here today to share their knowledge with you about brownfields and very general information, and hopefully you'll have the tools and the information to follow up with them and follow up with the resources to get the information you need. So just want to clarify a few things. This presentation is being recorded, so this will go on our New Mexico Economic Development Department's YouTube page, which you can access after the presentation. And as well, you can access all of our previous webinars that we've had. And it also will be put in a PDF, and we will email that out today. So if you have to jump off at any point in the presentation, feel free to do so, and we'll get you the presentation link and the slides to you today for you to access. Before we get started, I wanted to briefly go over the Finance Development Team's services, give you a little bit of insight about what we do. We provide a variety of financial services for New Mexican companies that are located here. We provide financial services and programs for companies that are interested in locating to New Mexico, and we provide services for those startup companies and entrepreneurs that are beginning and homegrown and looking to start their business in New Mexico. So we do financial packaging, review of financial statements, financial analysis, financial consultations. We provide tax incentive analysis, so we can look at a company and provide a summary of what state incentives are available to them. And overall, we can be a connector to resources. So many times companies or communities call us looking for what the best financing opportunities are, and we can connect them to the right resources, whether it's state, local, or federal, or even private. And we do manage several programs here in our Santa Fe office. So that is the Local Economic Development Act, the LEDA Fund, which is otherwise known as Fund It, New Markets Tax Credits, the New Mexico Credit Enhancement Program, the Rural Efficient Business Program, and a new program, a new federal program, the Opportunity Zones. So all of these, if you have further questions about them, feel free to reach out to us to discuss more. I'm not going to go into detail about them today. I think Joel actually will talk about some of them when he talks about financing opportunities. And then to give you a little bit idea about Fund It, this is a group that we manage that is a group of funders. So these are state and federal representatives that have funding programs. So that might be USDA or SBA, all the acronyms, the State Department of Transportation, the Department of Environment. All of these representatives gather together quarterly to review projects that are presented to them by local governments that involve economic development or infrastructure. So these projects are reviewed and discussed and brainstormed upon to give feedback to that community about the different financing opportunities that exist. So you might have an example where USDA says, that sounds like a great fit for our rural business development grant. And then you have Department of Environment saying, okay, this project fits into our clean water drinking program. And you might have Department of Transportation latching on and saying, okay, the street component we can fund. So it's a really fantastic opportunity to present the projects and get a variety of different feedbacks. And so here's a slide that shows a general overview of the resource partners that we have on the team. So if you're interested in that, our upcoming meeting is December 11th. The cutoff for applications is Friday of this week. And if you can't make that deadline, you can join the upcoming meeting in the new year, which will probably be in March. So you can go to our website to access that information. And Brownfields projects are completely open and eligible for funded. So it's often a really good fit. And another resource within our department are our regional reps. And as you can see, there's a map that's on this slide that breaks the state into 6 different regions. Hopefully you are familiar with and know your regional rep. If you're not, you can look at this slide, or you can access information on our website and you can get connected with them. There are boots on the ground, as they're often referred to. They're the front lines of the department. They know the area in which they're working and know the players and can help point you and your communities to the right resources. As well, New Mexico Main Street is in our department, and they are a fantastic resource, especially when dealing with brownfields and redevelopment efforts. Hopefully you're lucky enough to have a Main Street organization within your community. If not, feel free to reach out to them as well. So that sums up the finance development team, our services and programs that we manage, and the other organizations, or the other entities that are, divisions I should say, that are within our department. So without further ado, I want to introduce Jennifer, and she's going to get us started.
Okay, thanks, Joanna. My name is Jennifer Muus, and I'm with the Voluntary Remediation and Brownfields program within the New Mexico Environment Department. I'd like to talk briefly about what is a brownfield, why you should be interested in redeveloping them, and discuss the drawbacks and benefits to redeveloping a brownfield site. Okay, it looks like the slides aren't moving forward.
Okay, you should have control now.
Okay. Nope, it's not moving forward. Sorry about that.
Okay, I'll go ahead and advance them. Just tell me when you want to advance them, Jennifer.
Thank you. So what is a brownfield? The EPA definition of a brownfield is a real property, the expansion, redevelopment, or reuse of which may be complicated by the presence or potential presence of a hazardous substance, pollutant, or contaminant. So it could be anything from an old gas station to a vacant motel, a former industrial site, or an abandoned dump, almost any site with prior use. Brownfield does not have to be vacant, does not have to be a toxic waste dump or an industrial wasteland, and there may not even be any hazardous substances present. Next slide, please. Okay, thank you. The next couple slides provide some examples of brownfield sites. This first example shows before and after photos of the old train depot in Tucumcari. Oops, looks like we actually jumped one over. Yeah, there we go, thank you. The building was redeveloped into a museum. The building had asbestos-containing materials Now the property is a railroad museum. Next slide, please. Okay, the second example is a Sundowner Motel in Albuquerque. The building was constructed in 1958 and 1959. The nonprofit New Life Homes selected the property for affordable housing. There was lead-based paint and asbestos on site, but now the site offers 71 apartments for veterans, the formerly homeless, individuals with disabilities, and low and middle income families. Next slide. So how do you address brownfield sites? You start by identifying them. You can create an inventory of the sites in your community. And then once you have the sites identified, you need to investigate them to see if contamination is present. This is where Phase 1 and Phase 2 environmental site assessments are really key. The Phase 1 ESA is a historical review, essentially. You learn the prior site use and the prior use of the area around the site to help identify those concerns. And the Phase 2 environmental site assessment is the actual sampling to confirm whether or not the contamination is present. After that, you clean up the site and address the contaminants, and then you can redevelop the site. And community involvement at all stages is critical to a successful project. Next slide, please. All right, the benefits to redeveloping brownfields are numerous. For one, you can address environmental impacts that were not previously addressed. You can redevelop brownfields, and this would allow you to utilize existing infrastructure, such as utilities or parking. Another benefit is the removal of blighted properties. Redeveloping brownfields also limits the development of green space and urban sprawl and solicits community involvement and ownership in the redevelopment. Next slide, please. Of course, there are some drawbacks when redeveloping a brownfield site. You are redeveloping a property with a history, so there may be some surprises. This is why it's critical to get a good Phase 1 environmental site assessment before you acquire the property. Utilizing brownfields funding also comes with certain requirements, such as planning documents and reporting requirements exist as well. Sometimes it takes a little bit of work to entice developers to work on brownfields projects that could involve environmental contamination, and some developers will prefer to work on a clean parcel. Potential liability also exists, and it is vital to conduct a Phase 1 environmental site assessment within 180 days before you take title, and it's important to contact NMED about potential environmental liability. Next slide. Ownership and liability considerations do vary by state program. Liability at tank sites typically stays with the original party, whereas liability at non-tank sites often transfers with the title and the new property owner becomes responsible. The prospective owner must have a current Phase 1 environmental site assessment prior to taking title for voluntary acquisitions. The BUILD Act, which was passed by Congress in March 2018, amended the Brownfields provisions, and with these provisions, if a publicly owned property was acquired before January 11th, 2002 without a Phase 1 and the owner is not responsible for the contamination, you could still be eligible for Brownfields funding. After acquisition, the new owner must take appropriate measures to ensure that a release does not occur after you acquire the property, or you may lose eligibility for Brownfields funding. Next slide. There are several benefits when it comes to redeveloping brownfield sites, specifically linked to the economic development and community revitalization. Repurposing a vacant or underutilized property increases property tax revenue in the area. Property values increase in the area around a redeveloped brownfield, benefiting the neighbors. Community involvement results in a redevelopment that addresses a community need, and new or expanded businesses create jobs and create more revenue. Also, more available goods or services or community space brings more people to downtown. Next slide. Now let's discuss the purpose of a Phase 1. The Phase 1 supports landowner liability protections for the prospective property owner. This is critical for Brownfields funding and required for accessing the Brownfields funding. It also satisfies EPA's all appropriate inquiries requirement. The prospective owner does their due diligence prior to acquiring the property, showing they did not contribute to contamination at the property. The Phase 1 also helps buyers of real estate understand environmental issues that may be present at a property. And with the Phase 1, lenders can determine if they're making a high-risk loan, and lenders typically require a Phase 1 as well. Next slide, please. These are our partners that provide assistance for brownfields. We have Kansas State University Technical Assistance to Brownfields program, so this is also known as KSU TAB. They have plenty of tools and great assistance to offer, including a Brownfields inventory tool, grant proposal templates, editorial review, outreach, meeting participation. We also have EPA Region 6 Brownfields program. Karen's on the call to discuss this a little bit more. They've got some great services, including targeted brownfields assessments and redevelopment planning. Next slide. The New Mexico Environment Department has the Voluntary Remediation Program and Brownfields Program that have several components. We have the Targeted Brownfields Assessments, or TBA. Communities and nonprofits can request environmental site assessments. We prioritize requests based on demonstrated community involvement and plans for redevelopment. And assessments are done at no cost to the applicant. There's also the Brownfields Cleanup Revolving Loan Fund, or RLF. These are low-interest loans for cleanups at eligible brownfields. We also offer the Voluntary Remediation Program, or VRP. The state provides oversight for the investigation and cleanup of sites. The person responsible for the contamination may also be eligible. The state offers a certificate of completion when the work is done, and the VRP also has a lender liability protection component to help with property transactions. Next slide. The VRP and Brownfields program also offers technical assistance. Please call or email us with questions you might have about environmental issues or potential purchases. We also offer outreach. We'll participate in webinars or workshops throughout the state. And our program can also help eligible entities, such as municipalities, with their assessments. So please contact us if you have a site in mind or any questions. Next slide. So here's our contact information. We're happy to help. Please contact either Rebecca Cook, our Brownfields team leader, or Savannah Richards, or myself, Jennifer Muus, if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jennifer. We have Karen up now, and Karen, I'm going to try again. You should have control over the mouse. Do you want to try quickly? Or with your...
I'm trying right now, and I'm not having any luck with that.
Okay, and your keyboard arrows?
Yeah, I'm trying them all, and none of them are working.
Okay, all right. Well, tell me to move the slides, and I will.
That would be great. Thank you, Joanna. My name is Karen Peycke. I'm with the Environmental Protection Agency. Thank you, Jennifer. That was a wonderful introduction, and Jennifer covered a lot of the important details about the Brownfield program, what a Brownfield is, how it's beneficial. I'm going to be a little bit more of a 30,000-foot view and hopefully get to some success stories where they might hopefully resonate with you guys as an audience. Next slide, please. So the elements of brownfield revitalization, and I think Jennifer covered this, but I love this with all the color here. The first thing that we ask communities to do is really look at what is your reuse vision or goals. What does your community need? Don't look for brownfields, because there are brownfields in every community. I don't care who you are. Every community has one abandoned or blighted property or some eyesore that, you know, probably could use a little tender love and care. The first thing, look at your community and say, what do we need? Do we need affordable housing? Do we need affordable health care? Do we need a business corridor, a business park? Do we need services, banks, maybe some retail? Those are the things that you really need to look at when you look at brownfields as a tool. Then the next thing would be, when you're looking at your vision and goal, now you can go back and look at it and say, wow, well, there's this blighted property, and it's kind of holding up our ability to go forward with our reuse vision or goal. And so that's the inventory that Jennifer had mentioned. At this point, yes, inventory those properties in that area that you're identified as reuse goals, with reuse goals. And then when you identify those brownfields, by the way, one of the things that we probably need to emphasize is that there's limited resources, both at New Mexico Environment Department and at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. And so with limited resources and funding means that, unfortunately, you have to prioritize. So you have to pick out what is the most important brownfield, what's the one that's going to get me the most bang for my buck, or I need to have it go, or it's my catalyst project, whatever it is, it's your local priority driving it, going back again to your reuse vision. So if your reuse vision says that you need to have a whole city block or town block or your main street revitalized, and you've identified 4 brownfield properties, you need to probably pick out 1, maybe 2 that are the highest priority. And then go on and say, well, how can I leverage funding resources? Again, thank you very much to New Mexico Economic Development, because they're a great partner on finding leveraged other resources. So maybe you need to combine it with some private finance or funding, and maybe some public finance and funding, and maybe some grant funding if it's a really tough project. So leveraging funding resources, because it's not just having the reuse vision and inventory and prioritizing it, it's having the right kind of money to help you move your project along. So then let's say that you've kind of lined up some of your funding options. Now you move on to let's assess and clean it up on the highest priority brownfield project or site. So doing that environmental site assessment, that phase 1, so critical. But maybe that phase 1 environmental site assessment says that there might be environmental conditions of concern. For example, maybe it's an old building, it has asbestos or lead-based paint, or maybe it's an old gas station and the tanks are no longer, were put in place and were never registered with the state, and you don't know the status. So doing that assessment really will help you identify these things and see, is this something that you want to move forward with? And if the answer is yes, then maybe it'll also help you with cleanup planning, to plan it and say, hey, I need some cleanup assistance from the state of New Mexico, or I'm a public entity or nonprofit. Maybe I can compete for grant funding at EPA for cleanup. We're going to cover that in a minute. And then hopefully moving on to the next level, which is reuse. These are all things that are combined. This is kind of we call it the elements, but basically these things interact, and this is kind of how we want you to be thinking about it in terms of your own community. Next slide, please. So I call this the wheel of funding at EPA. On the, top 3, that's the most common grants that we compete out. Assessment grants being at the top. These are the most competitive grant funding that we offer because there's no match. And so everyone comes in for this one. However, it is the most competitive, and it actually has quite a high bar to meet in order to be selected for funding. The next one would be cleanup grants. We do those every year. Those are again pretty competitive. But you do have a 20% match for a cleanup grant. And you have to do a lot of work in order for you to come in for that cleanup grant and be competitive. The one over to the right, revolving loan fund, Jennifer had mentioned about the state of New Mexico having a revolving loan fund grant under Brownfields. And that means that they have the ability to do loans, to give to eligible communities or businesses. It can be private as long as they meet certain criteria. There's a 20% match for the revolving loan fund grant. And quite frankly, this is really a great program to kind of capitalize, because there's no one else out there that is actually going to fund a cleanup grant or a cleanup fund, project. So the bottom half of this table Multi-purpose is a new grant category at EPA. It came in with the new Build Act that was just passed this year. What does that mean? That means that we're combining both assessment and cleanup in one grant. And before all of you guys get excited, because I can hear all of y'all getting really excited about that, that is a tough one, because that means that the site that you're looking at for site assessment has to go through all that rigmarole, and then you have to go ahead and figure out how to clean it up. So if it's private property, that's going to be really contentious. If it's public property, then you have to meet all these other bars to enable you to access that cleanup dollars. It's a tough one. We've had it before in the past as a pilot. We're bringing it back out again. It seems really exciting, but it has a lot of hoops. So I'm not trying to discourage anyone. I'm just saying, be cautious, think carefully. The 01 over to the right, job training grants, we actually compete that one every other year. There's no match to that one, and that's to promote workforce development. So let's say a great example, there's one actually, a job training grant at Santa Fe Community College. They're working at promoting asbestos and lead-based paint abatement. That's a really big thing, because that adds on to a construction worker's skill set. They have to be certified at the state in order to be able to do abatement. That actually brings a higher dollar value for that workforce. Another one would be wastewater treatment plant operator. That was one of the job training grant recipients in our region. An operator has to be certified. If they receive that certification for wastewater treatment plant operator, their salary is in the six figures, over $100,000, and that's a pretty big number. The bottom one, targeted brownfield assessments and services. EPA also provides environmental site assessment, phase 1, phase 2, where actual sampling happens, and a phase 3, which was what we call a cleanup plan. What it can't do is do the actual cleanup. But we coordinate and collaborate with New Mexico Environment Department on New Mexico sites, so our monies go further together. So we may combine to do assessment together again if it's a complex site. Next slide, please. And I want to emphasize this. Jennifer covered this, but I cannot stress this enough. A phase 1 environmental site assessment, or what we call an all appropriate inquiry, actually creates liability exemptions for the property owner if you complete this phase 1 for that prospective purchase of property before within 180 days. It's not as big a deal, if you will, if you're not looking for cleanup funding from either NMED or EPA. But if you are, it keeps that funding option open. I guess that's the biggest message. And it does this, the shelf life of this phase 1, it doesn't last forever. We've had communities come in and say, well, I had a phase 1 done 5 years ago, and then I took title to it 5 years later. I'm sorry, that doesn't count. You have to have it within that 180 days. What happened to that particular community? Well, it closed off funding options for cleanup for that community. It doesn't mean that they couldn't go forward. It just means they have to finance and fund the cleanup out of their own pocket. And I just had a community come in to me very recently, in the city of Houston, as an actual developer who bought property. He had not had a phase 1 done. He was going through and got an SBA loan, and they did a transactional screen on his loan and found out that the property he bought was adjacent to a dry cleaner. So now the bank has required him to go back and do a phase 1 and possibly a phase 2 within 45 days, because they're trying to close on this loan. And he's really in a tough pickle. And I asked him, I said, why didn't you do the phase 1 before you bought the property? He says, well, I didn't want to spend the $3,000 or $5,000. He says, I was in a hurry. And I said, you know what? I think that's really sad, because now you're having to fund whatever, if there's a cleanup that's going to be needed or additional tasks, you're going to have to fund it or finance it on your own. So again, the lesson learned, do your phase 1. It's the cheapest insurance you're ever going to undertake when you're dealing in real estate. Next slide, please. Let's talk about some really good things, some success stories. Next slide, please. Arts and open space and culture and history. Believe it or not, New Mexico has great art, has beautiful open space, has culture abundance, and has a long and rich history. Next slide, please. The La Capilla on Chihuahua Hill in Silver City is a great example of kind of all three. This was a former silver mine site, the hill. It was kind of unattractive. You can see it over below the before picture over to the bottom left-hand corner. You know, it's just kind of a bald spot in town. The picture above is a actual black and white photo of a chapel that used to be there, no longer there. And so this great group of activists within Silver City really wanted to see a memorial to the silver mining and to the chapel. And so they worked with, they actually, the town of Silver City actually had a Brownfield assessment grant. They did an assessment, found out there was low levels of contamination that were contained, and they could safely develop this as an open space. And they built that lovely track over to the right, and they had that lovely little enclosure, and they still have ceremonies and festivals there. It's a great space. It's beautiful. And again, this was the town decided they needed to beautify this area, and that's what they did. It's a great example of using assessment grant funding and promoting their history and their culture and a great open space. Next slide, please. Another one that is kind of more of an economic development, although small scale, is Zuni, Pueblo, outside of Gallup. This gas station, Malco gas station, this picture was taken in October 2012. It had been in the petroleum storage tank program for long-term monitoring because they had a petroleum plume subsurface in the groundwater and from release from old tanks. And they were able to document and release it from petroleum storage tank because the concentration of petroleum had finally minimized, and that allowed the site to come in the Brownfield universe, which was great. So we were able to work with New Mexico Environment Department. Actually, New Mexico Environment Department's the hero here. They did a follow-up assessment. They did some small abatement because there was asbestos and lead-based paint, and that allowed the community to come back in Zuni, Pueblo, and demolish the structure. And then you're like, well, okay, so now they have an empty lot. Well, actually, they have an empty lot where they host Food Truck Friday. Yes, out in Zuni, food trucks, which, by the way, contributes to the local economy. A lot of restaurateurs or folks start out with food trucks. They just can't afford the, expense of having, an actual space. It's, the capital to do an actual structure is pretty enormous. And so this is a great idea. And you'd think, wow, Zuni, how big a population? I think the village or Zuni Pueblo has got a population, I want to say 6,000 or 7,000 at most. And so I think this is so creative and so on board. This is going to be this is on their tribal main street, by the way. It's an interim land use. They may end up building a new structure out there, but in the meantime, while they gather their resources and look for other funding, they're coming up with a creative interim use, Food Truck Friday. Next slide, please. I included this example from Texas. Yes, I know I'm talking to a New Mexico audience, but I really think that this is very creative. Throckmorton, Texas, which is in West Texas, it's probably about an hour northeast of Abilene. If anybody knows where Abilene, Texas is, West Texas. It's got a population of 900 people. It's not very big, but Throckmorton really values open space, park space. And so instead of them trying to attract a developer there, what they've done is they have made their main street be part of their history as the gateway to the West. That's how they market themselves. That's how they're branding themselves. They're the gateway to the West. And so they've got these little pocket parks. I wish I had a picture of they've got sculptures. And anyway, I could go on and on about Throckmorton, but what they actually, their Brownfield site was an old closed gas station. It had several underground storage tanks. One that was, three were pierced by the Department of Transportation when they were doing repairs to the state highway, and Throckmorton had to actually pay for the cleanup and removal of those 3 tanks. But there were 3 additional tanks that were remaining that were intact, and Throckmorton came in for a Brownfield cleanup grant at $30,000, and were able to pay for the safe and proper removal and disposal of those tanks. And then they built this little pocket park in place of it. It's very attractive. It's got low maintenance grass, and I think that eventually they're going to have sculpture there, and it's a great place for them to host a pop-up event whenever they need one. This is a great use. Next slide, please. Hello, next slide, please.
Yeah, I switched it. It's, do you not see it?
Nope.
Lost Pines Art Center.
All right, well, I'll go with it. Lost Pines Art Center. So Lost Pines Art Center is a great example of a bigger scale. It's over in Bastrop, Texas. That's the Lost Pine area of West Texas. And I think this is a great example to show you guys, because Lost Pines, it used to be an auto repair. You can see over to the left. It's got all this, it was just ugly. It's on their main drag, Chestnut Drive, and they had these metal buildings. Most of us have recognized those metal structures. It was overgrown. And in any case, what happened was it was the Bastrop Art Guild, all these artists in Bastrop gathered together and said, we really want a venue for us to do, to exhibit art, to actually encourage and promote art, sculpture, painting, etc. And so they were able to acquire this property. The Texas Commission on Environmental Quality did their, we combined with EPA and TCEQ, and we did the site assessment, and they were able to enroll this property, the Bastrop Art Guild, into the voluntary cleanup program, got it cleaned up enough sufficiently, there you go, to have it, to have the structure demolished, and then they found the capital, God bless them, to build this beautiful art center. That's all new construction. They have a great art venue. You know, they have an exhibit venue. They're actually looking to host, you know, kind of like artists of the month, not month, but of the year, to come in and do sculpture and painting lessons. They do it for kids during the summer. They've even added a little wine bar. I think you can see that in the middle. So this is a great example. They were very creative. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Can you, Joanna, can you forward it on to the next slide?
Yes. Sorry, there's a bit of a lag for some reason. Thank you.
Oh, no worries. So La Clínica de Familia is an affordable healthcare provider in Las Cruces, New Mexico, in South New Mexico. And I don't know how about you guys, but if you've got a community where you had an old hospital, and this is the case, closed Memorial General Hospital, this was where generations of people in the Las Cruces community were born, went and got their arm fixed if they broke it, or leg, went to go see grandparents after, you know, while they're in the hospital, or died there. And so it has a lot of resonance in that community. And so La Clínica, recognizing that, acquired the hospital from the city of Las Cruces, who, by the way, had bought it and operated it as their city hall while they were waiting to build a new city hall. And so La Clinica had to find the funding and finance to do a significant amount of asbestos abatement, over, I think it was over $200,000 worth of abatement. But they were able to do that. NMED, again, the hero, came and did a great site assessment. They did a survey for them and a cleanup plan. So that enabled La Clinica to find the finance, and they worked with New Mexico and Economic Development on financing this site. And now they've opened it up. They rehabbed it. It is the Cervantes Complex Central Medical Center, and it's beautiful. It's a great idea. Some of you guys, if you have an old hospital, you know, don't jump to the conclusion it's because it's old or because it's got asbestos that it's cheaper to just demolish it and start new, because a lot of times it's not. You have to actually abate the asbestos and lead-based paint before you can demolish it. And in point of fact, a lot of the structure is already intact. You already have a lot of good infrastructure. Instead of trying to demolish it and build new, rehab it. It might pencil out easier. The deal might make it better. Anyway, this is a great example, and it was a great job generator. You know what, I can't stress this enough. It was really exciting to see this happen. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Hotel Clovis, New Mexico. At one time, this hotel was probably the tallest building between, you know, California and Texas. This is huge. I think it's 12 stories. You'll see over to the left in this gray day that they took this picture. This has been over 10 years ago. It had all those broken windows. And this was obviously taken in the winter. The bottom left-hand picture that you see how it's, you know, it's really, the paint's peeling. It's very ugly. It's got graffiti. I didn't include the picture where it had dead birds and lots of bird poop, because ew. And so the city of Clovis and the I think it's East New Mexico Council of Government bonded together, were able to, this was a tough deal. They were able to find the finance, and they worked together. They got a brownfield cleanup from EPA. They worked with New Mexico Environment Department to do the assessment, and they combined all those resources to address the environmental issues. And they were significant here, because it sounds it sounds like a joke. Oh, dead pigeons and pigeon poop. But if you add that up for decades, I understand from the city of Clovis, you couldn't actually walk past the 7th floor because it was got so much debris in there. And when they had to do the cleanup, they actually had to wear what you call these moon suits, full encapsulation, because of the bacteria from the bird droppings and the dead carcasses. So this was actually a major undertaking, and the city of Clovis was able to find the finance. I believe they worked with New Mexico Economic Development again, and they found a developer, and they built it. It's affordable housing. And by the way, isn't that a beautiful mural on that building now? That's great. Because of this project, the city of Clovis has attracted the same developer to build new apartments. They're really on the way to really revitalizing their Main Street. And although we're talking about, you know, how affordable housing, this is also creating a lot of interest in Clovis. I understand there's a university there. There's a lot of things going down there, but it was just this huge catalyst project that really got the thing going for Clovis, and you know, kudos to them. Next slide, please. I'm just going to, again, reiterate the Brownfield news. We have a new reauthorization, Brownfield Utilization, Investment, Local Development, Brownfield Build Act, that was reauthorized in March of 2018. There's a website. Please use it for more information if you're doing a little research. And then the last slide, that's my contact information. Next slide, please. That's my contact information, again, the website. I hope that you guys will consider this. I think that it's a great tool for revitalizing communities, and I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Karen. That was wonderful. Really great information. So here's Joel Salas with the Economic Development Department, and I'll advance the slides for you, Joel.
Thank you, Joanna. Hey, everyone. Today, I'm going to be talking about some various financing tools that you may be able to use in your brownfield project. So by this point, your brownfield has been assessed, cleaned up, and you're looking for financing to finish up your project. So I want to note that there's a large number of financing options out there, but it's not necessarily a one-size-fits-all kind of deal. In many cases, you might have to get a little creative with your financing, with the financing tools in order to get the funding you may need. Next slide, please. So Joanna mentioned at the beginning some of the services our office provides, but our office also manages a number of different tax credits, some of which provide funds in some cases directly back to a company. The angel investment tax credit is a way to raise funds for a project, whereas the high wage jobs tax credit and rural jobs tax credit are cash tax credits that are available. We work directly with communities on industrial revenue bonds, the IRB Light, which is an equipment-only IRB, new market tax credits, EV5 regional investment centers, and the new opportunity zones. Next slide, please. So LEDA, to put it in the absolute simplest form, is grants in exchange for job creation. It's the Local Economic Development Act. Funds are allocated by the legislature to the department. We make those funds available to companies that are expanding or relocating in New Mexico. Funds can be used in land, building, and infrastructure. The funds are awarded based off of various factors, such as job creation and other demonstrated public benefits. Naturally, in the case of brownfields, we want them to be remediated and developed, so they would get additional consideration. These funds are not 100% of the project money, but can be potentially 10 to 20%. Next slide, please. Let's see. So here we have a nice summary of some public sector tools. You can see there towards the bottom we have a list from least costly to most costly, with bond financing at the least costly, with grants all the way up at the most costly, and all the colors of the rainbow in between. Next slide. So bond financing can be a useful tool for redevelopment projects with many options depending on the project. Bonds help spread the cost out over time, and public debt in the form of municipal bonds can give a community a way to build now and repay with future income. So you can see on the bottom, the IRS distinguishes between the two types of debt, public use and private activity bonds. Next slide. Public use bonds. It can be known as government or municipal bonds, used for various purposes, highways, schools, parks, etc. General obligation bonds are generally voter approved. They don't have a revenue stream, and these are often for projects that have some form of public benefit. Next slide, please. Private activity bonds are issued by the government for general public benefit, but immediate benefits are, however, going to the private entities. These are often or commonly known as pass-through or conduit bonds. This is because the obligation to repay the principal and interest rates rests with the private entity involved and not the public entity that issues the bonds. An example is industrial revenue bonds or industrial development bonds. IRBs are a tool to encourage business expansions and location job growth and capital investment. They must be issued before the project starts. And some of the types of projects qualified as activity bonds are redevelopment of designated blighted areas or qualified manufacturing projects. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to briefly mention this slide from our friends at Consensus Planning. If you have a metropolitan redevelopment area, you can do, these bonds can be useful. You can see here they're similar to IRBs, shorter 7-year term, and the municipality is not obligated on the bond. Next slide, please. So moving into tax increment financing, this is a technique for funding a qualified capital project, its related infrastructure or maintenance of the project from a stream of revenue generated within the geographic area defined as a TIF district. Depending on regulations, primary governments with taxing powers can often use TIF, but redevelopment agencies can also be a party to a TIF project as well. As mentioned here, it is a mechanism to capture the future tax benefits of real estate improvements to pay the present cost of those improvements. Next slide. So here's a useful illustration to help visualize what's happening in a TIF. You can see requires adoption of metropolitan redevelopment area. Just kind of, it's always good to have a little visualization of what's going on with some of these things. I will say, where was I going with this? Yeah, if you are going to move forward with a public activity bond or any increment financing tools, you will be dealing with the Board of Finance, who will have a say on availability of private activity bonds and is a decider on the increment financing tools such as TIFs. Next slide, please. So the New Markets Tax Credit is available for qualifying census tracts. So those are tracts with a poverty rate of 20% or higher, or a median family income that is less than 80% of the average for the state or region. So it encourages investment and development in these low to medium income areas by lowering costs and reducing risks. It provides tax credits per dollar of investment into the community development entity and is allocated over 7 years with 5% for the first 3 years and 6% thereafter. There's a good transition into opportunity zones, a similar concept of encouraging investment and redevelopment into low to medium income areas that have been designated as opportunity zones. I believe there's 63 census tracts in New Mexico that have been designated specifically as opportunity zones. Essentially an investor can realize unrealized capital gains and deposit those gains into a fund and then deploy those funds into an opportunity zone. So the investors get tax incentives and projects that might not otherwise get funded, get funded. So that's generally all I have for today. This was a real quick run through, you know, a high level run through of some of the tools that are out there. I want to note that we have covered a number of these topics in previous webinars. As Joanna mentioned at the beginning, we do archive all our webinars, and then I would like to encourage you to look through archives on our YouTube channel if you'd like to hear more in depth about some of the topics we've talked over. And again, we'll be happy to talk with you one-on-one with any questions you may have.
Thanks, Joel. And I want to throw it out to the audience and the participants. If you have any questions, feel free to type those into the questions box that you can see on the right hand of the screen in the gray area. Feel free to get those out while we have the experts online. They are willing and ready to answer your questions. Really great job on the part of the presenters. And hopefully, if you have a community that has a brownfields, which Karen pointed out that there's no shame. There are brownfields in all of the regions and areas. Reach out to your New Mexico Economic Development rep, the folks at the environment. That's Karen that's Rebecca and Jennifer and Savannah. Reach out to the EPA. There are plenty of people on the ground in your area and region that can help and start that process and figuring out how to redevelop these areas. So I'm not seeing any questions coming in particularly. Do any of the panelists, do you have anything to add before we sign off?
This is Juan Torres. I just wanted to chime in really quickly. I appreciate Karen pointing us in the direction of the projects she mentioned. While we did do some work with those, the funding actually came for the La Familia project from the New Mexico Finance Authority, although we do work very closely with them to facilitate those grants, as well as the monies through the Smart Money program that came from the Finance Authority for the Clovis Hotel project. So just wanted to clarify. I'd love to take credit for everything, but you know, wanted to be clear. The New Mexico Finance Authority did you know, provide the funding for those two projects.
Well, Juan, you know, I think you do everything, man. That's why I always credit with you. But you're so honest.
Thank you.
And we are getting a few questions, so I'll go ahead and throw those out. One of the questions is a point of clarification. I didn't see the definition of CDE. Does someone want to take that?
Sure. So a qualified, a certified development entity. It's a designation from the Department of the Treasury that allows the entity to receive the tax credits. In our case, in New Mexico, our certified development entity, community development entity, is the New Mexico Finance Authority, and they receive the credits on behalf of the state, and they process the request for those credits through the Finance New Mexico arm.
Great. Next question is, when will the presentation be available online? We will try to get that out today, so we'll send that out to all the participants. The next question is the KSU assessment free?
The answer to that, KSU technical assistance is free, yes. And okay. So Kansas State University provides visioning and planning. I don't know that they do assessment, but they do visualization, and they will actually work with you guys. If you wanted to have a workshop, they'll bring in expertise. But the answer to that question is yes, that service is free.
Okay, wonderful. And another one for you, Karen. does EPA 6 have a GIS page of all sites in New Mexico?
The answer to that question is Region 6 does not have a GIS page separate. What we do actually have is that every brownfield property that has actually been going through either the states or through EPA is listed in an acres database. That's, I don't know what the acronym stands for, but it's a Brownfields database. And you can actually, if there's an address that you are interested in, you could put that address and see in a question on our webpage, national webpage. It's called Cleanups in My Community, and it will come up and tell you, yeah, there's something going on there or not. But to that, if you were looking specifically about an inventory of brownfield sites in New Mexico, I would probably defer to my colleague Jennifer specifically about, you know, sites that they're working on.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. You could contact us and we could send you a list, or you could also check out our interactive GIS mapping tool that has all of our VRP and brownfield sites.
Great, and if you'd like, Jennifer, you could email me that link and I'll send it out with the slide deck and the link to the presentation.
Sounds
we'll
good.
Get that out.
Thank you.
Looks like we have a final question, and this is in regard to opportunity zones. So Juan, if you're, I think you're still online, does the state have a plan to set up a fund or review process for dollar allocation of private investment capital to the projects in the opportunity zones?
Wow, that's quite a question. Currently, we in the finance development team are working on two fronts for opportunity zones. Number one is we're working with potential funds that are being set up. There's currently 3 entities in New Mexico that have expressed interest in setting up a fund. One fund called Invest US that's in Albuquerque. Deborah Burns is managing that, and she has stated that they are setting up a fund, and there's 2 other entities that are still considering it. So we're working with potential funds and trying to help understand what kinds of criteria they're looking for in terms of projects. And on the second front, we're working directly with communities to help them kind of buff up their qualified designated opportunity zones in their areas. So we're actually going to have fairly soon a new web tool on our website that will have all of the 63 designated opportunity zones by GIS layered, and we will give communities access to upload additional information to that web page so that they can have some assistance in marketing those zones to potential funders. So working with the funds to better understand what projects they're looking for, and working with communities to help them better market those zones, and all of that is going to go up on our website in the next couple of weeks.
Great, and we had a few more questions come in. The first one is in regard to the site assessment grants, and that is, does a community need to show public involvement before applying for a site assessment grant?
So that's actually a very good question. Under the competitive grant program for brownfield assessments, you do have a criteria with regard, it's called community engagement. So by public involvement, yes. So if you've demonstrated that you have you're doing town hall meetings, or you're doing, webinars, or you're doing social media, and that's how you engage your community, that would give you more points, if you will, on your grant when it's being reviewed. And it is a very big deal. It's a very big part of Brownfields, public involvement, community involvement, and engagement.
Okay, thanks. And another one for you, Karen. Can you please explain the importance of a Phase 1 ESA/AAI?
Oh my God! Wow, of course I can. I think that, AAI. The importance of that's probably the most important message. If I hope that everybody takes away, it's called your environmental due diligence, and it is so critical. It's $3,000 to $5,000 worth of investment for you to take that property, knowing that it might be potentially contaminated, and not be held liable for that past contamination if you if you have that phase one done by an environmental professional. It opens up the avenue for funding for you for cleanup if you are a public entity, nonprofit, i.e. you can come in to compete for a cleanup grant. It also opens up the ability for you to receive a loan from New Mexico Environment Department, because you're, again, had your phase one done. If you don't do that, you can't get the loan from the NMED for cleanup. So, it covers two things. One, it's a protection for you for, liability or responsibility for past contamination. But two, it also keeps avenues of funding open for you. So it's really critical. And the third one, and I think probably the most important to everyone else, besides all this gobbledygook about government, is that you need to know what you're buying. It's like buyer beware. This is not buying like something, an Amazon where you say, oh, I see a great picture of it and I'm going to buy it. This is a piece of property. You need to know what's on that property. Why would you buy something sight unseen or have, some kind of report? It's that big a common sense. You need to know what the business risk you're taking on by buying that property. If it's really that cheap and it's really that big in a hurry for a turnaround, maybe you need to slow down. Anyway, that's my soapbox. Sorry.
Thank you. And let's see. I think that one more. This will be our final question. It is for you again, Karen. Can you describe who is on the first contact team that initiates the phase one process? NMEDD, realtor, landowner, other city officials, etc.
That's actually a very good question. Who's the first on the team? I think the first person on the team is whoever is the local champion that's interested in the project. Contacting New Mexico Environment Department. Jennifer and Rebecca and Savannah are awesome. If you know what, they are a great team of people. New Mexico is so fortunate. They have invested a lot of the state's resource in the Brownfield program and have 3 people available to you. If I have talked to people directly. You can always call me, of course. You can't reach, Savannah, or you can't reach Rebecca, or you can't reach Jennifer. You're certainly welcome to call me, but I'm always going to loop back to NMED. So that would be for an assessment. That's how I would suggest. Please contact NMED first, but if you can't reach them, which is probably, it does happen occasionally, they're real busy folks, they may be out in the field, then you're certainly welcome to call me as a fallback. And we always collaborate and partner together on site assessment assistance in New Mexico.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. And we had a question come in that is in regard to the meeting on December 11th. And so I wanted to go to this slide. These are some upcoming NMEDD FDT events. And these relate to Brownfield's financing. They can be options to fund certain aspects of Brownfield's projects. So we have an upcoming Rural Efficient Business Program workshop in Carlsbad. That is a program that we go to different regions of the state along with an engineer from Energy, Minerals, Natural Resources, and help businesses and ag producers address efficiency issues and energy consumption issues. And we look at the importance of conserving energy and look at, does it make financial sense to implement renewable energy technology? So this can be helpful if you have businesses in your downtown communities that are looking to save money. And our next one is in Carlsbad, December 5th. You can register at that link. And we will be in Gallup. That will be our final workshop in March. And then the Fund It meeting that I referenced earlier, this can be a fantastic outlet when you are brainstorming and questioning how do you finance a particular project. And it can be in a brownfields area, it can be a redevelopment area, anything that has to do with economic development efforts or infrastructure in your community. You can present an application to the Fund It group. And if it's a good fit, you can make that presentation to the group and get excellent feedback, firsthand experience, and knowledge from the group members there. So the application cutoff, this is an error. It says November 29th, but it's actually Friday, so that's November 30th. That's coming up. It's this week. If you don't make the cutoff for this meeting, you can apply for the first quarter, which that cutoff will be sometime at the end of February, early March. And our next webinar series that we will be addressing, that'll be on December 20th. And Jolene Sloan with the DFA will be talking about CDBG funding. That will be a good, insightful webinar. That's coming up. You can register at the link. And then want to point out that the NMEDD finance team, we're actively enrolling lenders and projects into our credit enhancement program. This is a program that's relatively new that can assist businesses that have projects and are looking to get a commercial loan but have a gap in collateral. So that means that if they're looking to get a $100,000 loan, but maybe they're a service business, they don't have a lot of assets, and the bank is willing to give them the loan, aside from the fact that they are missing that 100% collateralization. So maybe they have a deficiency of $20,000. We can come in and purchase a CD in the bank, our lending institution, for that amount. So in this example, $20,000. So the bank will make the loan. So that's a really exciting program that we have. So if you have businesses that are looking to do projects and need financing, this is a great tool that we have. So please contact us if you have any questions. Here is our contact one, whom you heard from, finance team leader Joel Salas, finance development specialist, myself, and we have the links to our team page and as well as the department page. So again, I want to thank Karen and Jennifer for the excellent job and resources that they provided in this exciting topic of brownfields. As Karen mentioned, there's a lot out there, a lot of potential projects in New Mexico, and a lot of corresponding people that can help and resources. So feel free to contact any of the panelists so we can assist your communities in their projects. So thank you for tuning in, and hope to see you at one of the upcoming events. And thanks to the panelists. Thanks to Jennifer and Karen and Joel.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Take care.